Hello, and welcome to Enter the Rabbit Hole.
Hi, I'm Alicia.
I'm Will, and this is the series where we do a deep dive on something that we think is a little bit interesting, and you'll find it a little bit interesting too.
Yeah, hopefully it's something maybe you haven't heard of or maybe you want to know a little bit more about. So today we're starting with the letter A.
A, A,
A, A, A.
I don't know why I'm doing that. Yeah, so we're gonna choose a topic that begins with the letter A that we think is kind of interesting, and then we're gonna do a deep dive into that. So today we are talking about A is for
Afrofuturism.
yeah. Now, I don't know about you, but I had never, I think I'd heard this term before, but I had no idea what it was. And actually, when I heard the term for the first time, the first thing that jumped into my head was the movie Black Panther.
Sure, and I think most people will know Afrofuturism from Black Panther. It was immensely popular, and it shows a version of a fictional country in Africa that is wealthy, it's full of incredible technology, and we talk about the costume design because it is gorgeous. Obviously, it won an
Yeah.
Academy Award for Best Costume Design.
Yeah, what's really impressive about the costume design in Black Panther is that all of their designs are taken from real world tribes and real world ethnic groups that live in Africa.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, even without that cultural history, which only adds to it, it is just beautiful to look at and a really vibrant and lived in world.
Yeah, not to mention all the futuristic vehicles, buildings, all the technology that they use. And this is a movie that a lot of pundits did not think was going to do well. They didn't think Black Panther as a standalone title was going to succeed. And I think the elephant in the room is the fact that not only are you dealing with a black superhero, which I guess we had only seen a couple of times before on the big screen. Blade jumps to mind immediately. Shaquille O'Neal in the 1990 movie Steel. Can you think of any others off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head, and not only is it a black superhero played by Chadwick, the late great Chadwick Boseman, but also a mostly black cast,
Hmm.
which in terms of a superhero movie, had definitely never been done before, and not on such a commercial level.
Yeah, I've got a quote here from a article by Alex Wiggin on itsastampede.com, and he said at the time Black Panther was one of only five Marvel Studio movies to sit at the $1 billion club, following the Avengers, Avengers: Age of Ultron, Iron Man 3, Captain America: Civil War. So Black Panther eventually pulled in over $1.3 billion worldwide, which is just, even a few years on, that is an incredible figure.
And it was the ninth highest grossing box office all time at the time
Mm-hmm.
that it came out, and the third highest grossing in the USA and Canada. It was
Mm-hmm.
had 7 Academy Award nominations and 3 wins for costume design, production design, and original score, which is just incredible. It's an amazing movie, and it deserves all the accolades it got.
Yeah.
But it is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Afrofuturism.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's definitely something that I think has relaunched it into the zeitgeist, or if you like, I think it's something that's relaunched it into the mainstream, let's say the predominantly non-black mainstream, right? So it's something that, full disclosure, neither Alicia nor I are black. So this is something that, this movie kind of put it on our radar and the radar of many other people that we know. And I think, in addition to that, we can't talk about the resurgence of Afrofuturism without talking about the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement last year.
So, obviously, Black Lives Matter started trending in 2012 and 2013 after the acquittal of Zimmerman for his murder of Trayvon Martin.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we saw some protests, especially in 2014, but the movement really gained more national
Recognition, I guess. Yeah.
In 2020.
Yeah. After, of course, the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, within I think a few days or weeks of one another, and of course, I think it'd be fair to say, with so many people feeling disenfranchised and otherwise out of work or in lockdown because of the COVID situation, this is something that was forced, rightly so, into the public spotlight. And so now Black people, Black bodies, Black rights is something that is back on the table. It's back in discussion for, again, people like ourselves. Which leads us back into today's topic, Afrofuturism. So what exactly is Afrofuturism?
So it would be a mistake to call Afrofuturism black sci-fi.
Yeah, let's start with what it's not.
Sure, it's not throwing a black character into a science fiction novel or movie and claiming that it's Afrofuturism.
Yeah.
It's not having black characters in space. That's not Afrofuturism.
Yeah, which isn't to take away or denigrate the role of pioneers in the sci-fi genre. The one that leaps immediately to mind is Nichelle Nichols, who played Lieutenant Uhura in the original Star Trek TV series. A lot of people point to her and they say this is the first time that they saw a black woman on screen who wasn't playing a maid, who wasn't playing a second-class citizen. She's playing an intelligent, empowered woman in the future. And so they would point to this and say, oh, this is Afrofuturism. But that's not quite right. Could you explain why?
So, Afrofuturism, as we all know, like Star Trek was created by Gene Roddenberry, right? Who is not a black creator. What we're looking for is black creators to create things for a black audience and for it to really be rooted in the cultural experience of being black. So to be rooted in the idea that you've had your history taken away from you, that you have been displaced, that there are so many obstacles you're overcoming, and you're looking towards the future and wondering what you can create in terms of your past.
Yeah, and those are all themes that we're going to discuss in a little bit more depth later in the episode. So, and again, that's not to take away from the role of Nichelle Nichols in that particular TV series. I've got a little anecdote here. So apparently she considered coming away from the role after only playing that character for 1 year. And famously, she was told one day on set that she had a fan who wanted to meet her. She just assumed that it was some Trekkie, and it turned out that it was actually Martin Luther King Jr. And when he found out that she was thinking about stepping away from the role, he implored her. He said, "You have to keep doing this. You have to stay on screen. This is so important for young people to see an empowered black woman on TV." So she kept at it, and she appeared in the rest of the TV series, and she even, I think it was in their second season, she had what many people think of as being the first televised interracial kiss with William Shatner, playing Captain Kirk, and then appeared in the subsequent movies. People like Whoopi Goldberg have even pointed towards that particular actor and that particular character and say that they inspired her. Whoopi Goldberg, of course, played one of the central characters in Star Trek The Next Generation, alongside people like LeVar Burton, who played Geordi LaForge. So, again, this isn't to say that she didn't play like an incredibly important role. We can also point towards people like Billy D. Williams, who played, I'm forgetting the name of the character now, in Star Wars. Lando Calrissian, the role that was then taken up by Donald Glover.
So these are all really important roles. But the reason they are not Afrofuturism is because you look into that world, and those are the only black people you see portrayed in that world. Star Wars, for example, is a huge multi-galaxy world, and yet we only see one black person.
Yeah.
Why is there only one black person in an entire
We're in a galaxy far, far away where there's one black guy. And it's something that has obviously been addressed in the series since then. Obviously, we now have John Boyega, who played Finn in the most recent Star Wars movies. He has had his own things to say about Disney and Lucasfilm and his portrayal in that role, and the fact that they kind of did a little bait and switch with Finn in The Force Awakens. Of course, a lot of people thought that he was lined up to be the next central character. He was going to be the next Jedi. And then they obviously pivoted to, I want to say...
Daisy.
I can't remember her surname now. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But so they've obviously changed the central character. We also don't have to just look at media as sources of Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is rooted in real life, and really anyone who is talking about the Black experience and looking towards a Black future that's propagated by Black people with some level of optimism is essentially an Afrofuturist. So we can actually look a lot further back than these examples in the real world, can't we?
So let's first take a look at Frederick Douglass, born in 1818 as a slave. He escaped slavery and is obviously a famous abolitionist. He is an incredible speaker and writer. He wrote many autobiographies and is credited with pushing forward the abolition movement.
Yeah. Also a staunch Republican, which I found surprising until I remembered that Republicans and Democrats in the USA, there was a big switcheroo there, wasn't there?
Yeah. So
yeah.
He's really a Democrat in our terms,
I guess. Yeah.
But he has a great quote. I mean, he has a multitude of amazing quotes.
Oh yeah.
But just one of them, which I thought was quite relevant, is where he says, "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe."
Yeah. Another Afrofuturist that we can point to from roughly the same time period, a fellow abolitionist, Harriet Tubman.
Yeah, 1822 to 1913, obviously. An incredible member of the Underground Railroad who did 13 missions and basically rescued around 70 enslaved persons. And she was also a women's suffrage activist. She was an armed scout and spy for the Union Army. She was just an incredible person.
Yeah, and I didn't know this about her. She founded a care home for old people and then subsequently passed away in that care home in 1913. Yeah, which I thought was quite interesting. So I guess what we're pointing to here with just these two examples, we've got two people who, I guess, earlier in American history are trying to champion the rights of Black people, and they're trying to envision a better life for Black people moving forward. So if you want some more examples of what exactly Afrofuturism is, the term itself was actually coined as late as 1994 by an author named Mark Derry. So what do we know about Mark Derry?
So Mark Derry is an author, mainly academic writing, and he really studies cyber culture and the effects of the digital age. But in terms of Afrofuturism, he wrote an essay called Black to the Future, where he coined the term Afrofuturism. And in that essay, he interviews some of the most famous Afrofuturist writers, such as Samuel R. Delany,
Trisha Rose, and Greg Tate as well. And I think in that he's talking about their thoughts on Afrofuturism and the representation of Black people in the sci-fi genre. I guess especially they do talk a little bit about popular media outside of literature, but they're focusing more on written media in that.
So his big question in this essay is sci-fi is already about like marginalized people. It's often about big picture ideas that maybe writing in a different genre you can't really hit as well, such as feminism or you know the environment. And he's wondering why aren't there more Black sci-fi writers for such like a marginalized community. But he also poses the question that can a group who's had their history erased look towards the future? How do you do that when you don't have a past?
Yeah, exactly. So that's where the term originally comes from, and he does touch on some of the things that we're going to cover a little bit later in this episode. But first, we are going to take a break. We'll rejoin you shortly. And welcome back. So, earlier we were talking about where the term Afrofuturism comes from and some real life Afrofuturists. Now we're going to do a deep dive into Afrofuturism in popular media. So, let's start with Afrofuturism in literature. In Mark Derry's 1994 essay, Black to the Future, he does make mention of essentially like the big four early African American science fiction writers. So Samuel Delany, Charles Saunders, Steve Barnes, and Octavia E. Butler are just some of the names that he mentions in that particular essay. Let's start with Octavia E. Butler. So we've both done a little bit of reading on her in the past week. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so she was obviously a Black science fiction writer in the 60s and 70s and 80s. One of her, I think her first novel was called Kindred, published in 1979.
Right.
And it's about a writer, a Black writer named Dana, who time travels between 1976 LA and pre-Civil War Maryland, like a plantation. She can't control this time travel. She just basically gets pulled back in time and has to try and survive basically as a slave on this plantation. While doing so, she realizes that one of her ancestors was the plantation owner who rapes one of his slaves.
Okay.
And she's constantly traveling back and forth in time and seeing the progression of this plantation and the slaves that she knows. And her white husband is also drawn back in time with her a couple times.
Right, yeah. But presumably has a different experience from what she's gone through.
So within the novel, he has to claim to be her owner because she needs some protection.
Right.
And then he gets left behind in the past at one point. She time travels back to the future.
Not to oversimplify things, it sounds a little bit like that sci-fi trope. I'm saying sci-fi, I'm sure you see it in other genres as well, where in order to get past the villains, you have to pretend that one of you is in custody of the other one, like when they're pretending that Chewbacca is being guarded by Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. We're back in Star Wars again, folks. I started reading the first book of the Xenogenesis trilogy, Dawn, which is, I consider myself a sci-fi fan. I think it's fair to say that some sci-fi books are more high sci-fi. The concepts are just stranger, they're bigger, and this is definitely on the other end of that scale. So the book kicks off with a woman awakening is how she describes it, almost as though she's coming out of a coma, and she discovers that she's on an alien spacecraft and Earth has essentially been destroyed, I think 200 years before, in some kind of nuclear holocaust. And the spaceship that they're on is controlled by a race of alien beings who have observed Earth. They tend not to get involved with other alien civilizations if they're in the middle of a conflict or in the middle of a war, but they've decided to do so because their species are what they refer to as gene traders. So they will, how can I explain this? The entire point of their species is to, almost like the Borg from Star Trek, they're trying to make themselves better all the time by assimilating other species and crossbreeding with other species and taking so, for example, in their species, they have three genders, male, female, and then a third gender who synthesize genes from other creatures and then produce something better. So, for example, the main character, she has a history of cancer in her family, and then she finds out that they've taken the cancer and they've turned it, they've made it benign and they've turned it into something useful. And so, I guess the whole deal here is that the main character can go back to Earth, but she's going back to Earth to essentially be used to breed a new species of part human, part alien creature. And she doesn't really have much choice in this. She can either do that or stay on the spaceship. So I think for me, you can draw pretty clear allusions there between the experience of the main character in Dawn and the experience of Black people when they were first taken from Africa and then put in places like America. They have a continuing existence, but that continuing existence is at the whim of somebody else who's been put into a more powerful position than they have. And their future moving forward is kind of taken away from them. It's no longer theirs. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that particular subject.
Yeah, so basically being used for almost like the color of your skin, right? The genes that you have are kind of a stand-in for using your body as slavery,
Yeah.
right? Having your autonomy taken away from you, your agency, and really being thrust into a role that you have, again, no agency in.
Yeah. Yeah. I should point out as well, all of what I've told you is made apparent in the first 50 or so pages in the book. There's not too many spoilers there. And I've got to say, like, it's some of the better sci-fi that I've read. It's really compelling and it really makes you want to read it all the way through. I might go ahead and read the rest of the trilogy. Another book that I think we both touched on. So I read Binti by... help me out here, and apologies because we are doing our best not to butcher anyone's names in this episode.
Nnedi Okorafor.
Yeah, Nnedi Okorafor's Binti. Again, quite a prolific science fiction and fantasy writer. And so in Binti, the main character is a member of the Himba tribe from Namibia. And this takes place far in the future. And she's a very talented mathematician, and her role is described as harmonizer. So she's essentially offered a position at the galaxy's most advanced university. And in order to go there, her family essentially forbid her from doing that, but she wants to make something of herself. And so she boards a living ship. It's I want to say it's a genetically engineered shrimp that has been turned into a vessel that they're going to use to traverse the galaxy. And then very early in the book, the vessel is boarded by a race of jellyfish creatures that kill the rest of the crew, but they keep Binti, the lead character, alive. Binti, so one of the unique things about her is that in this universe, the most powerful, and it's never directly stated whether they're human or not, but the most powerful class are called the Kaush. And the Kaush look down on Binti and they look down on her people because she is ethnically Himba, and her people, although they're very technologically advanced, they keep to their traditions. So one of their traditions, for example, is to cover themselves in again, I don't want to butcher this word. I want to say ozija, oziji. It's a mixture of red clay and oils from different flowers, different plants that they use to cover their skin and cover their hair, their braids, in order to, because they live in a highly, very dry environment, in lieu of using water to clean themselves all the time and also for protection from the sun. They cover themselves in this substance. It's a really important part of their culture, to the extent that when Binti escapes from her family to go to this university, among her few possessions that she takes with her is a jar of this particular substance. And the jellyfish creatures keep her alive. It's alluded to that this substance has special healing properties. I don't know if you want to speak to this at all, because I know that you've read a little bit of Binti.
I have read a little bit of Binti, not as much, and it is a trilogy.
Yeah.
But I've read another one, Nnedi Okorafor's books, and I actually read this one, say almost half a year ago, Akata Witch, which is about a 12-year-old albino Nigerian character who is born in America and then moves back to Nigeria. And in Nigeria, she finds out that she has magical powers and is one of a community called the Leopard People.
Okay.
And the Leopard People are part of tribes all over Nigeria, and they all have magical powers. But she is a free agent because she doesn't belong to one of these different groups. And she has to basically move back and forth between spheres of her life, the sphere of her parents, her school, and then also like her magical teaching school. And I find it fascinating because not only is she albino and was born in America, so she is not seen as fully black or fully Nigerian.
Right.
Like, she is an avid soccer player, but she can't play in the sun. And she is endowed with these magical powers, but she is not fully accepted into this leopard community because she's not a part of one of the tribes.
Yeah.
She's a free agent. So it really drives home this idea of the other and being an other in your own skin and in your own community.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme that is explored in Binti as well, is the idea of wanting to retain. So the lead character there needs to get away from her family in order to live her truth and to be the best version of herself that she can be. And yet she also wants to retain that tradition. She wants to retain who she is from where she originally comes from, even though, and again, this is set in far future, but she really experiences so many strange looks and so much indirect bigotry from the people around her, because although, again, she's this fantastic mathematician and this incredible engineer, you know, she looks like a tribal person, and so they kind of look down on her for her strangeness and her otherness. So yeah, I guess there is this sense of finding your identity and trying to parse out what that means for you exactly. And I think these are two really good examples, not only of Afrofuturism, but also just young adult fiction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just speaking to the Black experience, but it's speaking to a universal experience.
Yeah.
Of how we find ourselves, and especially coming from a place like America, where most, unless you're Native American, you're not from America.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are trying to find their history and reconcile that with where they are in the world, and what they're doing and who they are.
Yeah.
And obviously, no culture more so than Black people who have been taken from their home and put into a different culture.
Right, exactly. And there's, I think it's fair to say that amongst different groups of Black people, there's often this question that comes up time and time again of being Black enough. Are you Black enough? Essentially, whatever that means.
Sure. Are you mixed race?
Yeah.
And do you act white? Do you are you a part enough of our community to be called Black?
Yeah.
And what does that even mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be Black now? Obviously, I have no idea, but part of my history is Mexican.
Yeah.
And if you look at me, I look very white, but I was raised by a Mexican grandmother.
Yeah.
And in Mexican communities, I will never be Mexican enough because I didn't grow up speaking Spanish. And I learned Spanish in Spain, so even my accent is the wrong accent.
Precisely, yeah. And for me, for those who don't know, I'm Scottish and I grew up in a working class background. And so it's part of what it means to be Scottish in the UK is often what you're not. So sometimes it can go down the relatively sectarian route of, well, I'm not English. And so what does that mean? How much do you know of your own history? That still exists to this day. And also, I want to say sports is a big part of the working class Scottish experience. But as a kid, following football or following rugby, it wasn't something that really interested me. It was something that I dabbled in. And unfortunately, it was part of that, I guess, those growing pains that every kid goes through where they're trying to fit in. And so you wear a mask for a little while, you try and be something else for a little while to see if it fits you. And so I would just look at the name of the Rangers current lineup or Celtics current lineup, and then try and spout those names to other people, and they could immediately see through it. And so it wasn't right for me. So for me, I guess for you, that question was, were you Mexican enough? For me, was I Scottish enough? And yeah, it takes a while to kind of find yourself and realize that you are enough, regardless of what you are, you're enough.
Yeah, and I think that's what's important about Afrofuturism is that it doesn't just and it shouldn't just be media for Black people. It speaks to a common human experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody at some point feels like an other in their life, or they feel like a loss of their history or who they are. And reading these books not only opens your eyes to a different culture and just incredible storytelling. For example, in Akata Witch, there is so much Nigerian mythology that I had no idea about. And reading that was just incredible because I feel like, sure, I know about Norse mythology or Greek mythology, but I've never been exposed to that, and it just kind of feels like it's opening up a whole new genre for me.
I don't want to be too reductive here either. It does feel like we're living through a moment where, I mean, as a kid, I used to get so excited for going to the cinema, and for me, that love has kind of waned over the years because, yes, I do love the MCU movies, and okay, Black Panther is a fantastic example. Captain Marvel is a fantastic example of taking, otherwise marginalized people and putting them in a prominent role on the screen. But ultimately, we're spending our money every few months to go and watch another superhero movie, and essentially we're kind of seeing the same stories told over and over again. And this is, it's really exciting to know that there is media out there that tells really different stories and that it can tell those stories to whomever, So yeah, I don't know, Akata Witch might be one that I go and check out at some point. Of course, we're not just talking about Afrofuturism in literature. You can also look at things like graphic novels. And one of the examples that we came across was an author called Tim Fielder. So Tim Fielder has done a number of different graphic novels, but his most prominent one is Matty's Rocket. So Matty's Rocket, for those who don't know, it's published on his wonderfully titled Diesel Funk label, which is a relatively new, comic distributor. And the name is so suitable because it's a story of a Black woman called Matty who is living in the Jim Crow era, but she is a pilot and I guess an inventor as well. And she uses her abilities and she uses her technology to try and, so I think she fights aliens, and at one point she fights the Klan as well. And it's just such a weird story and such an interesting story that wasn't already being told in a medium that I just think it's a fantastic medium to show that.
So I think Tim Fielder is a perfect example of a Black creator because he saw this gap in the market for what he wanted to do and the stories that he wanted to tell, but no one was willing to take that chance on him. And so he decided, well, I'm not just going to sit around and wait. I'm going to create something for myself. So that's where Maddie's Rocket was born of, was this desire to be his own creator, be his own manager, and tell the stories that he wanted to tell.
Yeah, I think he does a fantastic TED talk about that very thing. The idea of how you have to do it for yourself and you have to keep pushing the ball forward. And again, he opens it up to the audience and he's like, where are the LGBTQ heroes out there? Where are the Hispanic heroes out there? Where are the X, Y, or Z? So really throwing it back to the audience to take this and make something for themselves.
Yeah, you create the heroes that you need to see. For example, when I was younger, all I wanted were fantasy stories with female leads. And there weren't that many when I was growing up. And it wasn't until I was maybe in my late teens that I started finally seeing there was a huge boom of like female dystopian writers.
Yes.
Maybe a little too similar to each other.
Yeah.
But at least there was a range of books to look for where I could see myself as the hero of a story instead of Conan the Barbarian or even any of the popular science fiction or fantasy books at the time, which I loved, but couldn't find myself in those stories. And so it's so important for you to create something where you feel like you're the hero or people like you feel like they're the hero.
Absolutely. Yeah, not always just straight white males between the ages of 20 and 40, And we can also look towards art for some other examples of Afrofuturism. So I know this is something that you did a little bit of research on.
I did a little bit. I'm gonna butcher his name because it's French. Well, it's Haitian. Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Okay.
He is kind of like a graffiti artist, and a lot of his art is influenced with like Black characters mixed with like robots, and it's very striking. It's colorful.
Yeah, it's fantastic stuff. It's just bright, like vivid yellows, vivid blues. Yeah, really eye grabbing, really attention grabbing stuff.
Beyond just like artwork, we also have music. Afrofuturism probably gained first prominence through Sun Ra. So can you...
I think before we pivot onto the music, we should take a little break. So join us in a second and we're going to tell you about the exciting origins of Afrofuturism in music.
And welcome back. So let's talk about some of the musical influences, some Afrofuturism in music.
Yeah. So earlier we were talking about literature, and there's just a wealth of stuff out there for Afrofuturism in books. Arguably, music might be the second biggest media out there in terms of this particular movement, this genre.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it begins with Sun Ra, who really started in the 1950s. And Sun Ra is a really interesting character because he is a jazz musician.
Yeah.
But he draws very heavily on Egyptian mythology and mysticism. So even his name, which is a shortened version of his full name, but takes the Ra from the sun god.
Yeah.
In Egypt.
Yeah.
And a lot of his music, which we've listened to a little bit, has influences of like jazz, but also mystical kind of music and like the
almost
way,
like folk music.
Yeah. And the way that he and and his band dresses are in big robes and with headdresses at times.
So this is like a big part of their band is their persona, their image. So almost like when you think of Prince as an artist, you're kind of thinking of Prince as a character, almost like the characters that Lady Gaga becomes on stage. Almost like, I mean, you could draw examples from numerous different genres. Like Kiss, you would never see Gene Simmons as Gene Simmons actually appears in real life. You're always thinking of the giant boots and the makeup, etc. So Sun Ra and his band, they're not regular looking musicians. There's this kind of pageantry that goes alongside it.
Yeah, they're even called the Arc-Kestra, spelled A-R-K.
Yeah.
Estra, and then his persona is of an alien from Saturn on a mission to preach peace. And so he kind of like denies who he was before Sun Ra.
Right.
And he like fully embraces this character of I'm probably gonna butcher the name, but Li Sonyer Ra.
I'm not going to correct you because I just can't. I can't correct you. I'm going to tell you right now, though, the writers behind Stargate and the writers of Ancient Aliens, they owe Sun Ra a lot of money. Okay.
Oh, for sure. I mean, now that you've mentioned that, and we look at Stargate, like especially like the first movie.
Yeah.
Oh, you can really see those influences of like Afrofuturism and Sun Ra.
Yeah.
Like his costuming.
No, it's great. It's fantastic. The kind of thing where, I mean, personally, I'm not big into going to live events too loud. I'm too much of an old man. But if I had to go and watch a live concert, I would love to go and watch these guys play. And so, of course, following on from Sun Ra, you can see direct influences in the likes of George Clinton and Parliament. So George Clinton, I think he was quoted as saying that he wanted to show black people somewhere else. And if black people could be anywhere else, then you could show black people in outer space. And so he had, if you look at those albums, if you look at the album covers as well, bearing in mind all of this predates MTV, it all predates music videos. So a lot of their image is being projected not only through their costumes, but, you know, you buy vinyl and the image that's on the front is kind of the story that is accompanying the music underneath. And so that is George Clinton's whole thing. That's Parliament's whole thing, is that you're looking at these black guys and you're listening to this really funky, synthy music. Incidentally, been listening to a lot of George Clinton this week, an artist affiliated with him, and it's great. One Nation Under a Groove is absolutely fantastic. But you're listening to this stuff, and then you're seeing these guys in these crazy outfits, and yeah, it's really out there. And I was never exposed directly to this. Like the closest that I got to George Clinton was maybe like the first time I watched the first season of The Mighty Boosh, and they make like a lot of references to him and people like P Funk, etc. And they do like a homage to him. The Mighty Boosh being such a weird show for people who haven't seen it. So they're capturing some of that weirdness, some of that
otherness.
Yeah, some of that psychedelic imagery and putting it into their own media. So yeah, and then the ball is projected forward, it keeps going. So
we have Jimi Hendrix, who was an avid fan of sci-fi, and he loved sci-fi growing up. Him and his brother would often read like sci-fi novels, and you can see it in his costumes, in a lot of his music, and just like his psychedelic kind of experience.
Yeah.
So he's really trying to push the boundaries of music and make it obviously like the Jimi Hendrix experience.
And then if you want to talk about black people in sci-fi in terms of musical artists, then you have to talk about Michael Jackson. So Michael Jackson, however you might feel about his private life, there's definitely, I mean, you can't really dispute his effect on the zeitgeist.
Yeah, his impact on society at all levels.
Yeah, of course. But the thing that leaps immediately to mind is his 1993, 1994 music video for Scream, which at the time was the most expensive music video that had ever been produced. And if you watch it nowadays, you know, it's heavily dated. Like the CGI that's used in it is super like soft edged and kind of gooey looking.
Yeah, I mean it's Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson.
Yes,
And,
sorry.
Yeah, it's a black and white music video set in a spaceship, and they're mostly dancing around this futuristic set, and they have like a bit of an androgynous alien-esque look to them.
Yeah, like Michael Jackson, I guess his look has always been a little bit more feminine. Janet Jackson has adopted kind of more masculine look. At one point in the video, she's seen they kind of sort of show her peeing standing up at a toilet. The whole point of the song, I guess, is like that they want people to stop looking at them and stop spreading gossip about them, whatever. But they're also projecting this image that's very, it's kind of in your face, and it's definitely going to get you talking. And yeah, they're doing everything. Like they're meditating on the spaceship, they're dancing up the walls of the spaceship, they're playing some kind of weird. It's like Pong. They're playing Pong, but it's like 3D Pong. Yeah. At one point, they've got those little. Do you remember those toys? You would like. They were like little balls with little nodules on them, and you would switch them on. They would kind of like jump around by themselves. Yeah. They've got like 20 of those running around the floor, which again at the time people must have been mind blowing. But yeah, we're talking about like a music video event tantamount to when Michael Jackson's Thriller came out. That was an event. That was like people waiting up after midnight to watch it on Channel 4 in the UK. So again, this is like big concept, big production, music videos. And then that is carried forward. So Afrofuturism and music videos, especially in the 90s, very much becomes a thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, so we have Missy Elliott's. She had a myriad of Afrofuturist music videos.
Yeah, it kind of becomes her bread and butter with one of her earlier singles, Super Duper Fly, The Rain, where she collabs with Timbaland, and the music video is directed by Hype Williams, who, if you look at his back catalogue, he does these massive budget, massive concept videos. So the Super Duper Fly, everything is shot on a fisheye lens, which again, technology doesn't always age super well. Nowadays, we see the fisheye lens being used in everything. But at the time, it gave everything kind of like a weird, out of proportioned look.
Yeah, kind of showing Missy Elliott as like out of proportion, but also larger than life.
Yeah.
Which is helped by this. At one point, she's wearing a costume, which I guess you said was leather. Kind of like a giant plastic inflated bag.
I think most people refer to it as the black trash bag costume, but it looks a lot more glamorous than it sounds.
I mean, it's Missy Elliott, so of course she looks glamorous.
And I think what is cool about that, just to kind of come away from Afrofuturism itself, like Missy Elliott as an artist is always kind of like owned her body type. She's a bigger woman, and she doesn't, unlike a lot of other female artists, especially solo female artists, she doesn't make an effort to hide that. She kind of plays up to that.
Yeah, you can see echoes of that in Lizzo. But I think Missy Elliott was probably one of the first female artists who I ever watched and was like, oh, she's not afraid to be who she is.
Yeah.
She's not, stick thin. And as like a kid who was a little bit bigger, I found that like welcoming.
And then you see that alienness, this otherness, you see it through pretty much all of her music videos. You see it in Lose Control, you see it in Pass That Dutch, and it kind of becomes her, almost like her signature. If you're watching a Missy Elliott video, it is going to be weird, it's going to be out there, it's going to get you talking. Yeah.
So let's move forward in time, and we have Janelle
Monáe.
Yeah, Janelle Monáe, who I think I've heard her music before, but I've never really watched her videos.
Yeah.
And she has a concept album that starts with Metropolis, which is rooted in the movie Metropolis.
Yeah, Fritz Lang's 19, I want to say 1920,
something
could be wrong. Yeah, one of the earliest sci-fi movies, Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Yeah, she in this concept album she plays an android who is basically subjugated and less than humans, and she falls in love with a human, and for that she needs to be disassembled and destroyed. And the first music video that we watched, what was the name of that one?
Dirty Computer.
Yes, and Dirty Computer I think spans the whole album. But the first music video in that is one where she is helping a couple other androids break free.
Yeah.
And
they're cruising around in a
hover convertible?
Yeah, it's like a Mustang, but it looks like a Land Cruiser from Star Wars: A New Hope. We're back in Star Wars.
Oh, for me it's it looks like the new Star Trek movie, the reboot.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway,
and they get pulled over.
Yeah, and it is very reminiscent of like any kind of Black Lives Matter movement where like this robot cop is like scanning them up and down, is checking their ID.
So I want to chuck this in here because this is a really great quote from an author called C. Brandon Ogbunu from July of last year, and he's writing on Wired.com, and he said, futurists ask what tomorrow's hoverboards and flying cars are made of. Afrofuturists ask who will build them, and does their commercial use fall out of their utility in military or law enforcement? And then he goes on to say, quote, futurists labor over questions about the nature of android consciousness and empathy. Afrofuturists ask how race might be wired into android consciousness, whether the android world might be as divided as ours is. So it immediately got me thinking about how even in the future, I think what they're trying to communicate is that even in the future, these people are essentially being targeted because all the androids in the car are black. And it got me thinking about a couple of years ago when they were talking about the way that facial recognition programs are being programmed, the way that the AI is being taught.
Yeah, and there was a scandal about Black people being misidentified as criminals because it couldn't tell the difference between Black features.
Yeah, and so it's disproportionately targeting people of color rather than white people. So in that sense, if it's facial recognition technology to be used by police forces, it's roughly in line with current police procedure to disproportionately target black people.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to look at where these things come from. And who is the one creating them. For example, there's such a disproportionately high amount of white men in STEM programs. And to have people of color programming something like an android, how would that be different from like a white person programming an android? What kinds of things would you find in that code?
Yeah. Which again brings us back to how, the pageantry of Sun Ra or Parliament or even up to Janelle Monáe, their costumes, their music videos are really high concept and they're incredibly fun to look at, but it all poses a question. There's always a dialogue beneath that. There's always a discussion to be had. So her music videos are really interesting, really
absolutely worth a watch. But so we've talked about literature, graphic novels, art, music, but what are some potential gaps in the media? And we'll come back to that after a break.
All right, see you then.
Okay, and we're back. So before the break, we were talking about music, and now let's talk about some potential gaps in the media. So obviously, a huge media at this moment is video games.
Yeah.
And video games that tell stories.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, we just had a big launch of Cyberpunk
I mean, we did have a big launch as well. Yeah, the big launch.
Of Cyberpunk
2077, yeah.
Which was a flop, but
yeah.
But stories that are asking questions about what the future will be like, and stories that imagine a potential future. And that's a huge market in video games, but we so very rarely see Black characters in video games. Obviously, we have, is it Bartlett from Final Fantasy VII?
Yeah. So you're testing me now.
Barrett Wallace.
Yeah, Barrett, the guy with the gun for an arm.
Yes.
One of the guys with a gun for an arm, because there are more than one.
So obviously there are Black characters in video games, but again, that doesn't make them Afrofuturist,
right?
And it doesn't really pose any questions within the world that they're in.
I did just kind of scratch my head, and I was like, as a kid, I was drawn to games like Akuji the Heartless, which was a criminally underrated adventure game on the PlayStation 1 where you play a voodoo priest who is cast into hell, and he has had his heart removed, Akuji the Heartless, and he has to go and retrieve it. And then the Shadow Man properties as well. There were two of those. The first one especially was meant to be very good. Based on a graphic novel, you're playing a black detective who, again, I think has to go into the underworld, and he's using voodoo rituals to try to track serial killers and bad guys. And again, it was brought out by Acclaim Entertainment and never received a sequel again. But again, these are just examples of Black people in video games as the protagonist, not Afrofuturism. And I don't know. I think it's something that is criminally underrepresented, and probably will be, unfortunately, for a long time to come. Apart from maybe if there are some indie developers out there, you know.
But we have, as we've talked about before, some excellent source material to draw on.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if there's the obvious Black Panther, but there are so many other incredible stories that you could so easily put into a video game.
Yeah.
So Charles Saunders, for example, we talked about briefly, but he writes sword and sorcery novels. He's probably the first Black fantasy writer, and his novels are set in a place called Numbayani. I'm so sorry. Again, I apologize.
It's called Numbayani. I'm so sorry.
Which is like a continent based on Africa,
right?
But is a fantasy world.
Yeah.
And how amazing would that be for an open world setting to explore? Just there's so many incredible settings you could have and stories you could tell through Afrofuturism in video games, and I think we have so many white stories and so many. And Japanese stories, but where are stories about other people of color?
I think part of the issue is that we are still trying to get around this idea. I mean, at one point, we're living through nerd culture kind of dissipating and moving into the mainstream, right? 20 years ago, people who went to go watch superhero movies were quote unquote nerds, right? They weren't the average person on the street. We're now seeing that come full circle because there's a price tag attached to it. People have realized that you can monetize this. I think we're still trying to get over the idea that people who play video games, they're not just skinny little white kids in their parents' basements. They're not just fully grown white men. They are people of every single race, age, and persuasion nowadays. And there is definitely a market there. I think part of the problem, if I had to guess, I would say part of the problem is because video games, AAA titles anyway, are typically collaborative exercises with massive teams of developers. And so for it to, again, Afrofuturism is about something by Black people, not just for black people, but it should be rooted in
Black
their
culture.
Exactly, yeah, and their creativity. It's their creation. It's something they have ownership over, and I think that's potentially harder to do on a large scale unless you're able to mobilize a lot of Black developers and have them get in a room together and sit down and make something together. However, future's a long long way away. Hopefully something will come of that. TV, I think, is another media that is potentially being criminally underrated when it comes to Afrofuturism, especially off the back of the reading material that we did this week. I mean, again, I feel like Binti would be a great mini series, something where you could really explore that universe and have some really exciting looking costumes, really exciting looking backgrounds, and kind of flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah, or Children of Blood and Bone.
Yeah, although
there is a movie being made, actually, as when the author had the book published, the movie rights were already in process of being sold. That's how incredible this book is.
Yeah, it's been picked up, I think, by Disney and Lucasfilm, and it's currently in pre-production. We've got no date there for when you might be able to go and watch this in cinemas, but hopefully in the not too distant future. But again, if we have missed anything here, please, by all means, we don't want to live in ignorance. Please message us and let us know if there are any gaps in our knowledge. Are there any fantastic examples that you have come across of Afrofuturism in TV, video games, or elsewhere that we haven't talked about? We do want to know.
Absolutely. And we're always looking to expand our horizons. And we're very aware of our own bias in the subject.
Yeah.
Neither of us are Black. And we are talking about an inherently Black subject.
Yeah.
So, we're aware that this is maybe not our specialty, but it is something that we're interested in, and we think more people should be aware of, and more people should seek out these types of media, because they're so important, not just for Black people, but for everybody to be aware of the Black experience.
Yeah.
And see just something new and creative.
Yeah, 100%. Come across really interesting, evocative stories which aren't, I guess, quote unquote, which aren't yours, which aren't your own, but to be able to kind of experience them and see the world through somebody else's eyes. On the subject of other people's experiences, other cultures, something that you brought up during our research I thought was really interesting, and I guess it's parallels to other similar movements from other groups and other individuals.
So something that I wasn't aware of, but was the Jewish influence in superheroes. So having read books like Cavalier and Clay, which is about two Jewish writers, and I am Jewish, so this was just actually felt really amazing for me to know, was that characters like Superman and Batman, Spider-Man, all of these huge characters were actually created by Jewish writers and born from the Jewish immigrant experience.
Yeah.
So if you look into, for example, the story of Superman, who is an immigrant, he is endowed with these superpowers, but he pretends to be an ordinary person. We can see parallels to the Messiah and to this experience of being an immigrant in a strange world and trying to hide who you are in order to get by.
Yeah.
So
I think you were the one who brought up as well the parallels between Kal-El being put in a little space capsule, sent to Earth, being taken in by adopted parents who find him in the middle of nowhere and then raised as a human, not dissimilar to the story of Moses being put in a little basket.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then
I said that like he was put in a little Easter basket surrounded by eggs and Kit Kats.
But this story of basically a person responsible for their race and their culture, but being born through basically having to pretend ignorance and pretend to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
And a lot of these writers were marginalized people. So, for example, you probably know the name Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
Famous for the Kirby dots.
Yeah, when you think of pop art.
Yeah.
Yeah. You think of these massive blown up cells with really bright primary colors, and then everything is colored using those tiny little dot matrix dots.
Yeah, so he was the creator of Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm.
His real name was Jacob Kurtzberg.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I didn't know that. Stan Lee, for example, was born from Romanian Jewish immigrant parents. And I think maybe he doesn't identify so much as Jewish, but he was raised Jewish, and his name is Stanley Martin Lieber.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these Jewish artists and writers were not credited for their creations.
Mm-hmm.
They were really the forefathers of superheroes as we know them.
Yeah.
But didn't really gain the rights to their creations because they were Jewish. So Superman, for example, the creators of Superman didn't get proceeds from that until 1978. So during a talk show promoting the first Superman movie, there was an elderly gentleman in the audience, and he stood up and said, "My name is Jerry Siegel. I co-created the character Superman from which they're making this movie. I work at a supermarket bagging groceries." And it wasn't until basically everybody, like fans, made DC pay Schuster and Siegel their dues that they really got credited with their creation of Superman. By the way, Superman's Kryptonian name, Kal-El, actually means all is God in Hebrew. So I think there are so many parallels between Afrofuturism and superheroism, like the Jewish superhero experience.
Yeah.
We see like this idea of creating basically a messiah or a perfect person to come save you.
Yeah.
From this life of marginalization.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier the novel Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chambon, and that does a fantastic job of kind of it explains these two separate stories, the story of the creators themselves and then the story of the superhero that they create, and this feeling of powerlessness, this feeling of disenfranchisement that gets funneled directly into creating this hero who could save them and who could make the world a better place. We should mention that Cavalier and Clay is largely set. The first half of it is set during the Second World War, the outbreak of the Second World War. So they're really, they're aware of how Jews are being treated, especially in their home countries. And so they create this superhero who, on the pages of these comic books are destroying these Nazi-like characters. And I don't know if we've mentioned this previously as well, but I think a lot has been made in the past of superheroes, especially the notion of manufactured superheroes, people who are unnaturally imbued with powers coming to save the weak, as being very similar to the story of the Golem in Jewish mythology.
Absolutely. So we can see some parallels there through Jewish mythology. And I think we can also see parallels in Latinx magical realism.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this before, magical realism and the work of, especially the name that leaps immediately to my mind is Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I have to admit, I don't know if magical realism is for me. I've tried reading Love in the Time of Cholera. I've tried reading 100 Years of Solitude. Neither one really stuck with me. Maybe, I don't know if, maybe I just didn't get it.
I think it's tough because his work is obviously translated.
Yes.
And it to me, it kind of brings to mind maybe earlier sci-fi novels where it's very dense. And it's a little bit harder for me to read, but this idea of magical realism is born from marrying the native cultures of Latinx people with their conquered history. So I think you can really see parallels there between Afrofuturism and Latinx magical realism. So it started in the 1950s, and is this idea that not like the whole world is fantastical, but that the fantastical is the everyday. Mm-hmm. That there is a character who has slight magical powers.
Yeah.
So, for example, in Water for Chocolate, the character can imbue the food that they cook with feelings.
Delicious.
And so we can see the fantastical and really like the otherness and the native peoples become like an everyday occurrence in the lives of Latinx people, which it is, but it's trying to marry that native culture with your reality of being a conquered people and in a post-colonial society.
Yeah, and I think it would be fair to say as well that people living in places like Central and South America, it seems like more of the native culture still exists there in everyday life. So more of that, I guess we would consider it wrongly or rightly, we would consider almost like magical properties or mysticism or that mythology is still there. And it's still something that surrounds them every single day. And also I remember something else. I think it was I want to say it was in 100 Years of Solitude. You have these really long lineages of people and people living outside of the normal human lifespan, which is something else that I think this is the part that I didn't really get. This is why magical realism doesn't really work for me because I need it to be magic or I need it to be real. And when the two blend together, it just kind of goes over my head. I think it's the same reason why I can't read Murakami, because Murakami's stuff will be rooted in the everyday, almost to the point where it's mundane. And then all of a sudden, somebody's talking to cats, and and I'm like, what just happened? So the point is probably not for me to get it. The point is for it to find some audience who appreciate it for what it is.
I agree. I think, all of this stuff is not necessarily for everyone. That's the point of genres and fiction writing is to find the correct audience, but also to open people up to something that they may not have tried before. For me, if you want to try magical realism, one of my favorite novels is The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde by Junot Diaz. And that is a book about the immigrant experience, the Dominican Republic and immigrant experience, and it's a family followed by a fuku, which is a curse, and just like this history of their family and their bad luck. But the book is written, so the author wrote it in both English and Spanish, and it's an easy read. It's not dense like 100 Years of Solitude. Very modern writing. It marries these ideas of what it is to be an immigrant and the immigrant experience, but trying to find your history.
Yeah.
And I think it's an incredible book, and it's definitely something that people should pick up.
Well, on that note, I think we should probably round off our discussion of Afrofuturism. So I've really enjoyed this topic. I've got to say, it's been eye-opening, and I definitely want to go back and revisit some more music videos from the 90s and see more of see more of that the influences of those earlier artists like Sun Ra, like Parliament, because I think a lot of it is there. I also definitely want to go back and listen to some more George Clinton, and I'm definitely going to be going and reading some more Octavia E. Butler in the near future. How about you?
Yeah, I think I've read some Afrofuturist books in the past without really knowing what Afrofuturism was.
Sure.
But I think within mind towards looking at more books, especially for me, but I would love to see more media that's not just literature and music videos. And I think it's something that you as a listener should definitely check out if you haven't already. It's just an incredible genre and an incredible storytelling device.
Yeah. So that's our call to action for this week, guys. Go and give Afrofuturism a quick Google, see what comes up, and see if there is not something there that you can dive into and become more engaged with, because honestly, it's so broad, and we've talked about this for over an hour today, but I wish we had double that time because we are barely scratching the surface. So thank you so much for listening. Next time, we are going to be jumping into the letter
B.
B. B. I'm doing it again, and I don't know why I'm doing it. So,
alright, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. We will catch you next time. Take care for now. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Enter the Rabbit Hole is written and presented by William Grant and Alicia Palmer. The music was created by Glenn Marshall. More information and sources can be found in the episode description. You can email us at etrhthepod@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at etrhthepod. Thanks for listening.